Hey everybody, so today I am bringing you my special melee weapons guide, and what that is including 6 melee weapons that are like swords but have special properties, as well as 6 other melee weapons that are completely unique to the game. So there's just one that I'm going to talk about that's available in pre-hard mode, and even at that it's pretty rare. It's actually quite rare. It's the Bladed Glove. It's a rare fast-hitting weapon dropped only during the Halloween seasonal event. Luckily that has either already started or will start in a couple days depending which platform you're on. It happens to be the month of October right now when I'm recording this. It is essentially like a sword in that it swings like a broadsword, but as you can see it swings ridiculously fast. It has a very short range and an insanely fast speed. Does only 12 base damage with 4 knockback, but a very fast 6 use time means that it can add up to a lot of DPS for pre-hard mode. It is a 1 in 2,000 chance drop from weak enemies. Weak enemies are those classified as less than 20 defense, less than 40 damage that they will do to you, and up to a maximum of 5 silver that they will drop in money. If you're playing expert, and particularly expert hard mode, not many enemies will fit that criteria, so easier to get it in normal mode and in pre-hard mode. But there you go. You can see, you can imagine in pre-hard mode that's actually quite a lot of damage. It will do that obviously at a very short range, but that's potentially very useful in pre-hard mode. Now moving on to hard mode, actually a very similar weapon I'm going to talk about, the Fetid Baghnakhs. That is essentially a very much upgraded version of the Bladed Glove, and it has the potential, in this case, of up to 3,000 or more damage per second when paired with the right accessories and so on. It has a much larger 70 base defense, 6 knockback, and the same rating at least of 6 use time. Supposedly it might be the fastest weapon in the game. As you can see, it's bigger and it swings very, very fast. It does more damage. So that is a 1 in 5 chance to drop from Crimson Mimics when you are in hard mode. As you can see, also still has a very short range, slightly longer, but very short range. But as you can see, again, it's going to literally tear through things. And if you pair that with the right armor and accessories, you can potentially actually out damage some of the bosses, so it can be actually a very powerful weapon just because of the speed. And by the way, I am going to talk about ones that are available on all platforms, and when I get to the ones that are not, I'm going to keep those for later in the videos. So I'll mention which ones are not available on all platforms. These first 6 all are. And some of these are sword-like. The first 4 actually are sword-like, and the last 2 of these first 6 are not so much like swords. So the next 2 that I'm going to talk about are the sickles. The ice sickle, first of all. As you can see, fires a little projectile. And again, these are all hard mode weapons other than that first one. But as you can see, that projectile actually slows gradually until it reaches a certain sort of maximum range and then hovers there, doing some continual damage. Now it is capable of piercing as well. It's a fairly limited amount of piercing, but it can do a decent amount of damage because of that sort of hover effect. And if you're using it against actual enemies, it will push them back a bit to continue to do some of that damage. So Ice Sickle has a base of 42 base damage on the updated platforms, 40 base damage on the non-updated platforms. Regardless, 5.5 knockback, 24 use time, and 8 velocity, limited piercing ability. It's a 1 in 180 chance to drop from certain enemies: the Armored Viking, the Ice Elemental, the Icy Merman, or the Ice Tortoise, all in the snow biome in hard mode. But basically a similar but slightly better weapon is the Death Sickle. Of course, Ice Sickle, get it? Ice Sickle. It's a bit of a joke there. Death Sickle, not so funny. But the Ice Sickle is an improvement over the Death Sickle is an improvement over the Ice Sickle. Again, in this case, the projectiles actually travel through blocks, so you can see it'll go right through those wood blocks, whereas the Ice Sickle will not. It will hit those blocks and not go through them. So that's one major advantage the Death Sickle has. It can travel through blocks. It's one of the rare weapon projectiles that actually can. But otherwise, it's similar. It has 57 base damage, 7 knockback, 24 use time, 9 velocity, emits a little bit of light, and pierces enemies. The piercing ability is pretty similar, actually. as you can see. Basically, these will normally do up to 5 hits, is what I'm seeing anyway. The wiki says a little this, a little that, but what I'm seeing is that it will do up to 5 hits. And this Death Sickle drops from Reapers during the solar eclipse. On the non-updated platforms, it's a 1 in 250 chance that it will drop from the Reapers, and the Reapers will appear during the solar eclipse after one mechanical boss has been defeated on the non-updated platforms. On the updated platforms, things are a little different. The Reapers will only appear after you've defeated all 3 mechanical bosses, and the odds are different in that it will then be 1 in 40 chance from the Reapers, and 1 in 27 if you're in expert mode. So odds are a little different, conditions are a little different, but same idea. Reapers in solar eclipse. And that is actually a potentially very useful weapon because of that. It will actually, as you can see, fire multiple projectiles. And of course you can increase your melee speed and therefore the number of projectiles. It does kind of hit a maximum at some point. But yeah, you can basically stack up lots of those projectiles, get your enemy at the right range, and it's going to actually do tons and tons of damage that way. Now, the 2 that are not sword-like, because those first 4, they're basically sword-like, and the wiki actually classifies them as swords, but obviously they have some unique properties. The 2 that are much more unique that are available on all platforms. The Scourge of the Corruptor, available only in Corruption worlds, found in the dungeon Corruption chest after defeating Planteras. When you can open that, requires that you have a Corruption key, which is going to be dropped in the Corruption biome. The odds are very small, but eventually you might get one. And this weapon fires a small eater head, which, as you can see on impact, splits into, let's see, 2 to 4 homing mini eaters, and these will actually home in on actual enemies. They don't home in on dummies, so let's show you that. Boom. There you go. And in fact, they will home in from a while after as well. They'll start to fly away, but if there's an enemy, they'll fly back. That's interesting, 2 compasses in a row. But yeah, they will home in on enemies, and actually you can use that effect because you can actually just keep firing them at the ground and create like a swarm of them, and they'll all pursue your enemies. So there you go. Scourge of the Corruptor is a reasonable weapon. These little mini eaters will ricochet. They will bounce off of blocks and walls up to 5 times, and each of them deals 60% of the original weapon damage. The base damage of the weapon is 64 base damage. It has 5 knockback and 19 use time, so it's a decent weapon. But the Crimson World counterpart is, well, let's just say it's a better weapon. And this is legendary, of course, the Vampire Knives. Hey, that's cool. It's a melee weapon that has a little spread fire, but it's so much better than that. It is, conversely, much like the other one, it is found in Crimson Worlds only in the dungeon Crimson Chest after you defeat Plantera, with, of course, opening that with your Crimson Key. It auto-fires a spread of 4 to 8 projectiles. Each successful hit heals the player by a small amount, which is why it's called the Vampire Knives. And if I get this at enough of a range, they will start to dissipate. You can see where they start to spin and they start to fade. And that's basically where you're hitting, where they stop being maximally efficient. They will start to fade away, and they will start to gradually lose damage at that part where they start spinning and fading, basically. And by default, that is a 28 tile range where they start to do that. After that range, they will continue, but they'll do a little less damage and so on. Like most other melee weapons, the range and velocity are increased by melee speed boosts. So if you get armor and or accessories and or buffs that increase your melee speed, you will increase that range before that starts happening, and therefore increase the effectiveness. And they'll also fire, they'll move faster as well. So the healing effect is 7.5%, 7.5% of the damage dealt. And since damage likewise is increased by melee armor sets, accessories, and other boosts, you can therefore increase that healing effect as well. And so you can see, actually, I'll do this against a Mimic because you can see it a little better, but when it actually hits successfully, it fires back those red lasers. The healing effect is actually instantaneous, but that's just an effect so that you can know that it's happening, more or less. It doesn't require that laser to actually hit you, but you can see it was actually healing me a little there. And yeah, this is the reason that vampire knives are incredibly legendary, and of course, if you get the right armor set and accessories and so on, it can be very difficult to die, actually. You just have to keep firing these at your enemies and stealing their health. Pairs very well with Ichor, which of course you also get in Crimson Worlds. You can get a flask of Ichor because that decreases your enemy defense and therefore increases the amount of damage and therefore increases the amount of healing. So the vampire knives have the 31 base damage, 2.75 knockback, 15 use time, and 15 velocity. So those are all the weapons actually that are available on all platforms, and there are another 6 weapons that are available, 4 of them on the updated platforms only, and 2 of them that are actually still PC only. So I'm just going to swap those out, and we'll be right back to talk about those ones. Okay, here we are. So the next 4 weapons, as I say, are available only on the updated platforms, which for now is PC, PS4, and Xbox One. Will be coming to mobile and so on. So first one functions very much like a broadsword with a weird little trait. It is the slap hand. Slap hand swings like a broadsword, just like a broadsword. The weird thing about it, what makes it special and unique, is the extremely high knockback. So yeah, otherwise very much like a broadsword, but it has 35 base damage, 20 knockback is the highest in the game for any weapon, 20 knockback, and 20 use time. So extremely high knockback, best demonstrated against Shark. Boom! It will literally slap your enemies away. So depending on your enemies a bit, it actually, I'm not going to show you against the Mimic because they're very resistant to knockback. So it depends on your enemy's resistance to that. But if you really need to keep your enemies away, this is kind of your best chance at doing that. And it is purchased from the Skeleton Merchant only during hard mode Blood Moons. So you have to find the Skeleton Merchant, and it has to be a hard mode Blood Moon in order to buy that weapon. Not that great, but whatever. So Shadowflame Knife, this is one of the more unique ones. So Shadowflame Knife auto fires small flaming knife projectiles. I think I killed a couple critters there. They ricochet off enemies. They do not ricochet off blocks, as you can see. But if I fire it here, it will ricochet off the dummies because they're considered enemies, I guess. And yeah, it will ricochet up to 2 enemies and then dissipate on the 3rd impact. So if I fire it just right, I can get it to bounce at one of the other dummies, and then it will bounce up again. There you go. And then if it hits a 3rd thing, then it goes away. But basically, it inflicts the Shadowflame debuff, which is fairly powerful, especially early in hard mode debuff that does 15 damage per second. In this case, it inflicts it for up to 3 seconds. So you can also stack that with other things like, Cursed Flames or Ichor or so on. You can actually stack a bunch of things. You can get a Magma Stone or various derivatives of that, and you can get your Frost Armor, and you can stack up to like 4 different debuffs just by getting the right things together. It has 38 base damage, 5.75 knockback, 11 use time, and 13 velocity. It's a 1 in 6 chance, or in expert mode it becomes a 1 in 3 chance to drop from Goblin Summoners during hard mode Goblin Invasion. So it is available basically from the beginning of hard mode. You just need a Goblin Invasion to happen. And there you go, you can get that. And it's reasonably powerful at that stage of the game. Moving on to something more powerful though, the Psycho Knife. So Psycho Knife, as you can see, as soon as I equip that, see if I switch off it, that goes away, but it goes into stealth mode. If I switch off, stealth mode goes away. If I switch back to it, into stealth mode. So it takes about a second for it to go into full stealth mode. And if you are sort of in the middle of, oh, I'm just going into stealth mode, but you move or whatever, stealth mode will disengage. But once it engages fully, then you stay in stealth mode until you either successfully hit an enemy or switch weapons, as I showed you there. So stealth mode, you do move slower, as you can see as well. but you actually get 4 times the damage. You get an extra 30% critical strike from a base of only 4 for the weapon. So it moves it from 4 to 34 critical strike chance, and double your knockback from the weapon as well. This only works with the Psycho Knife itself normally. As I say, lost upon a successful hit. So if I go into stealth mode, I can hit, but then I come right out of stealth mode and I lose that bonus. So only the first hit gets that if I hold the weapon down. But the thing about it, there are some exceptions though. The dash effect from the Shield of Cthulhu or the Solar Flare armor will also get that boost of 4 times damage and so on. And it also applies to any melee projectiles that were already fired. And it also stacks with other effects from your armor set and so on, accessories, blah, blah, blah. So you can use some trickery to basically get some special effects with the Psycho Knife besides the knife itself. You can, for instance, fire a Meowmere and that bouncing cat, as long as you can switch to your Psycho Knife and get into stealth mode before that cat hits something, then that cat will benefit from those effects as well. So that there's some tricks you can play there. But basically the Psycho Knife itself has 70 base damage, which becomes 280 damage in stealth mode, 3.5 knockback, which again is doubled to 7 in stealth mode, and a 19 use time. It's a 1 in 40 chance normally, or a 3 in 80 chance in expert mode to drop from the Psycho enemy during the solar eclipse, and the Psycho enemy only appears after you've defeated Plantera during those solar eclipses. So very powerful weapon all by itself. As you can see, I got a critical hit there, which doubled that again. Very powerful weapon by itself. With a little trickery, you can do some cool stuff with it as well. So next thing I'm going to show you here is the last of the weapons that's exclusive to the updated platforms, to all of the updated platforms, and that is, again, a pretty legendary weapon, the Daybreak. So I'm actually going to craft this because it's the only one you can craft of all the ones I'm talking about today. It auto-fires javelin-like projectiles that stick to enemies for continual damage. You can stick up to 8 of these javelin spear-like things into your enemy, and they will stick there, inflicting the Daybroken debuff, which does 25 damage per quarter second. In other words, 100 damage per second for 5 seconds. So you can imagine 8 of these, each doing 100 damage per second for 5 seconds. That's a lot of damage. That's my calculations are correct. That's 4,000 damage. And of course, you can keep firing them past that as well. If you already have 8 in there, you fire another one. It's going to replace one of the existing ones, but of course, they are going to wear out after 5 seconds anyway. They also emit light. Melee speed boosts increase their velocity rather than their firing rate. So let's go ahead and craft it, actually. It is crafted from 18 solar fragments at your Ancient Manipulator, this thing. So this is an endgame weapon. You need to do this after you've defeated the Solar Pillar. You can use it against Moonlord, though. You can get it in time for that. And let's show you. There you go. You're doing that maximum. That was actually 200 damage per quarter second. If I have all 8 of them in there, and you can see it actually stacks those up together. So yeah, up to 8 of them, and then you'll be doing 200 damage per quarter second, or 800 damage per second. A single one will do 25 per quarter second, 100 per second. And yeah, the weapon itself, the base damage is 150 base damage, 5 knockback, 15 use time, and 10 base velocity, best against single targets. One thing about this is that damage per second effect, of course, is the majority of the damage it does. That is not actually affected by melee boosts and such. So your armor effects, your accessory effects do not affect that damage per second stat, which actually makes this almost equally useful for non-melee players because those boosts, the actual damage per second stuff, is not affected by any of your accessories or armor and so on. And therefore, you can use this with any class. It doesn't have to be melee class. It's only that initial hit that for each one that is going to be affected by your melee equipment. So you can use this with any class, and it will do the same amount of per second damage. So there you go. And so that's kind of the actual ultimate weapon that I'm talking about today, but I do have two more to talk about that are available on PC only for now because they are from the Old Ones Army event, and specifically these two are from the hard mode editions of the Old Ones Army event. One is the Sleepy Octopod, which can act, it kind of looks like a broadsword at first. You swing it around and you can hold it down. And so it sort of acts like a broadsword if I just use it against the dummies. But it's more of a slightly more continual damage effect in an area around you, and it will also, it'll actually hold you in direction as long as that whole little cycle is happening there, the cycle of it swinging for a little bit there. But yeah, if you swing it for a full second, that's what you're seeing there. It will do that little smash attack, and that little smash attack does an area effect explosion. Basically, it's a small area effect, but it's a reasonable area. See, if I just swing it, it's only damaging those 3 dummies. If I hold it down for a second, it does that smash. It damages these whole 6 dummies in this area. It seems to do a little more vertically, perhaps. And yeah, so it can actually, that also damages the enemies in the area potentially multiple times. And that smash effect actually requires that there's something sort of like a solid-ish block. It obviously works with platforms, but if I stand up here where there's nothing in front of me here, that little explosion won't happen. It's basically a sort of a ground pound situation. It has to actually hit something at foot level, so to speak, or thereabouts, in order for that little explosion to happen. And the weapon itself does 40 base damage, 7 knockback, 30 use time. Chance to get it is fairly variable. It's a 1 in 10 chance if you're in expert doing the tier 2 version of the event. It's a 2 in 30 chance if you're just in tier 2 and not in expert. It's a 1 in 30 chance if you're doing the tier 3 version of the event, and that's a chance to drop from the ogre enemy. Who's basically a mini boss in the tier 2 version, but sort of the lesser one in the tier 3 version. And speaking of the tier 3 version, that's where you're going to have to be, which I believe is, if I recall correctly, after you've defeated Golem, it becomes the tier 3 version. If I recall correctly. In the tier 3 version, you can get the Sky Dragon's Fury, and this has a sort of similar effect of spinning around you, but you can see it's doing this sort of little radius thing here. So it spins in a radius around the player, leaves a damaging energy trail, as you can see. If I use this, you can see it's a pretty large radius, and it does quite a lot of damage. So that's what it does normally if you just kind of hold it down and swing it normally. But this weapon has a right-click attack as well. And that's the right-click attack. Basically, it fires blasts of 3 little projectile things that then explode into these sort of energy circles. So basically, the middle one goes where you're aiming, and there's 2 on either side. And it's reminiscent of the Electrosphere launcher. It is not exactly the same. It fires more of these faster, as you can see, but they do less damage. It's a similar idea, though. And those, of course, as you can see, burst into damaging energy rings, either at a certain distance or when they hit something. Yeah, blocks or enemies. And yeah, so weapon itself is 70 base damage, 5 knockback, 30 use time, and 24 velocity. Those stats are a little bit almost irrelevant because it has 2 different attacks doing 2 different things with 2 different damage rates. And the whole constant damage thing, of course, is very different than the stated use time, but there you go. It can do actually quite a lot of damage, and it is dropped by Betsy, which is at the end of the tier 3 version of the Old Ones Army event only. She's the sort of final boss of the Old Ones Army and appears only in the tier 3 version of the event. And yeah, that's actually all the weapons. I am going to actually I'm going to have to wait until nighttime falls, and I will then summon the Eye of Cthulhu and demonstrate. I'm just going to demonstrate a few of these, maybe just the last 2 or 3 against the good old Eye of Cthulhu, because those are the ones that are going to dispatch it quickly. So just a sec, I'll be right back at nightfall. Okay, here we are as night is falling, and I decided to slot back in the vampire knives because of course you want to see those in action, right? So there we go. We're summoning the Eye of Cthulhu, and I also decided not to use any armor or damage boosting accessories because, well, that just wouldn't be fair against this guy, would it? So you can see vampire knives, they're powerful enough actually to do a lot of damage. He didn't even have a chance to damage me, even with just those, and they will of course heal you as well. Now let's try this Sky Dragon's Fury. Even just that swinging effect is going to be pretty powerful, but let's fire some of these at him. And that whole energy field thing, obviously, very, very powerful. And last but not least, the Daybreak. Makes incredibly short work of poor old Eye of Cthulhu. So vampire knives will be very useful against pretty well everything except for the Moon Lord, because he has that Moonbite debuff that he can inflict to cancel out the healing power. And the Daybreak, well, that's very useful. Even if you're not playing a melee class, you can still use the Daybreak, and it's going to be very, very powerful. So hope you liked the video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.